Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual launch event for Floodchaser by Erin Tyler Hand. Uh, this book was the winner of the 2025 Catamaran Poetry Prize for West Coast Poets. And this prize is open to all poets living in California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii. And Erin is our first winner from Oregon. So congratulations, Erin. And we are in conversation here with poet Kathy Fagan. And so by way of introduction, I'm going to introduce our two poets and then they will take it away. So Kathy Fagan's, Kathy Fagan's seventh book, The Unbecoming, is available for pre-sale with W.W. Norton and will be released in September of this year. And her sixth poetry collection is Bad Hobby, which was the winner of the 2023 William Carlos Williams Award. Her previous book, Sycamore, was a finalist for the 2018 Kingsley Tufts Award, and she was a 2023 Guggenheim Fellow. She's been awarded National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, Ingram Merrill Fellowship, and residencies at the Frost Place, Yaddo, and MacDowell, and was named Ohio Poet of the Year for 2017. Her work has appeared in venues such as The Atlantic, New York Times Sunday Magazine, Poetry, The Nation, The New Republic, Kenyon Review, Academy of Poets Poem a Day, Pushcart Prize Anthology, and Best American Poetry. She has co-founded the MFA program at The Ohio State University, where she teaches poetry and co-edits the Wheeler Poetry Prize book series for the Journal and OSU Press. And Erin Tyler Hand is a Portland, Oregon-based creative writer and literary critic with an MFA from Texas State University. He's previously been published in Poem a Day, San Antonio Express News, Houston Chronicle, Porterhouse Review, Faultline Journal, Gasher Journal, Hash Journal, Funicular Magazine, among others. And in addition to his own creative writing pursuits, Erin volunteers his time to the prison teaching nonprofit Rough Draft and hosts the poetry podcast, The Personhood Project. So please welcome Erin Tyler Hand and Kathy Fagan, and you in the audience can participate in the chat and you can ask questions or respond, and we can all see that. Okay, so take it away, Erin and Kathy.
Erin, hello, and congratulations again on Floodchaser, your debut collection of poems.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sitting with me in this conversation tonight. I'm super happy that you're here and I get to talk to you again.
Me too. Erin and I met, for those of you in the audience, on the Personhood Project, a really, really important podcast, and I was honored to be asked to participate. I think we should just jump right in. Do you mind if I start with a question?
Let's go for it. I'm happy to.
Okay. Mary Szybist, who was the judge for this prize the year that you won, and also is the winner of the National Book Award, has said of your book, Floodchaser, that the poems are, quote, deeply engaged with the possibilities and reach of the human voice, end quote. The book stunned me with its range of voices and put me in mind of other writers who've achieved what you achieve here. I thought about Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology, Sherwood Anderson's stories in Winesburg, Ohio, Rita Dove's Thomas and Beulah, and more recently, Rebecca Gale Howell's Erasure Genesis. I wonder if you would talk about the process of making Floodchaser and engaging with the voices in these poems.
Totally. Yeah. Where to start? So I think in general, my mind kind of goes towards this more narrative route of things. Some of my early writing had the super narrative form kind of already ingrained in it. So when I was sitting down or I was thinking about putting this collection together, I was having a hard time not seeing some narrative flowing through it. And when I was first putting this collection together, there was actually two collections. I kind of saw the Floodchaser Noah poems being their own separate world. I was inspired by books like Rachel Zucker's Eating in the Underworld or like Olio, where the book is contained within a like single world. But then after speaking to a mentor, they were like, "That's really great, but what else is there? Like, what else can be said in that? Like, that there's a lot of mood and tone and things being said within that world, but how can it say more?" So that's when I really challenged myself to see how I could take, some of my more narrative or some of my more contemporary poems and mix them in. And the process took, a good 2 years after my MFA program. So, a lot of these poems are written in my MFA program. And then I had my thesis at the end. And, that was a draft of this book with a different title. And then those 2 years after the program of really like how thinking about that and thinking about this as one big book and how they could, the two sections could speak to each other was something that I spent a lot of time with.
I think that I definitely hear that in the poems, see that in the poems. Maybe we should sort of talk about that a little bit more. We should probably mention for those in the audience who haven't had a chance to look at the book at all that the organizing element in the book is the retelling of the Noah story in Genesis in the Bible. But what's equally brilliant and bracing in the book, it seems to me, is the, I dare say, author's own spiritual journey. There are voyages, so to speak, of the authors from state to state, from childhood to young adulthood, from ignorance to wisdom. And these poems preface the violence, particularly male violence, of the Noah poems. Would you discuss the ways in which masculine toxicity and even religious faith or fervor have influenced your art, your work, and maybe even your life? Certainly it's related to your work on the Personhood Project, I think. Anyway, just start there, and then maybe we could just hear you read some poems.
Totally. Yeah. I think that growing up in like a Midwestern suburban culture, I feel like gender norms are just what is expected of everyone. There's not really anything escaping them. And if you do, especially, times have changed a bit, but when I was growing up, still like everything was black and white in most people's eyes. And trying to escape that is hard to do. And a lot of that black and whiteness in my mind comes from, this kind of biblical stronghold over people. When I was writing some of the poems, or like what got me to think about writing the Noah poems in general, was this idea that, so many people, especially where I came from, are ready to like thump the Bible and like shake it at people for, doing things that go against it. But at the same time, how close of a reading of the Bible are they actually doing? How much are they actually trying to, see what else is in there or think beyond what the words on the page might say? Um, I had another poem that wasn't part of this book that I wrote in my MFA program, and it was uh, Jesus at a meat shoot. And for those who don't know, like a meat shoot is this like very very specific thing where you'd go to a VFW hall and you'd have like a BB gun and you'd shoot at like a target, and like the person who does the best wins like a rack of ribs or something like that. So in my mind, I was just like, I put Jesus in this setting because it just felt so like on one half like Midwestern, and on the other half like so like religion. Like I don't know, just something about those two worlds coming together. And I wrote that poem actually before any of the Noah poems, but it inspired it in a way. It was like, how can I think about the Bible or Jesus or retellings of the Bible in a new way that might get people to think about it more. So when I think of Noah, I think of this story that, in our like pop culture, Noah is this person who was on a boat or who gathered two of every animal, put them on a boat, and then they lasted for, 40 days, 40 nights, got off the boat, and then the world became a better place. And it's like, yeah, but what's in the Bible is like this long for something that lasted essentially like a year, if you follow everything's being said there. So like how much emotion, how much pain, how much suffering, how much looking back and realizing you're the only people left in the world, everyone else is killed, like that has to really like haunt people, that has to really come down on people. So I'm like, my hope is that, if someone who picked this book up and would read it, that is religious, might think a little more about their Christian religion or what it says or what's in a Bible. Is that really happening? Maybe not, but I hope that happens. That would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if you might, since you mentioned it, maybe read a poem or a section from the book that addresses male relationships, or at least the Noah sections
Yeah,
that
let me
you'd like
see
to
here.
share with us.
I think before I jump into that, I'll just talk about how I kind of arranged the Noah
Oh,
section
yeah.
for those who maybe haven't had a chance to read the book yet. In the Noah sections, it's kind of written like diary entries on the from Noah and his three sons. And when I thought about his three sons, there's Japheth, who's the oldest, Shem, who's the middle son, and then Ham is the youngest. And I tried to give them a little bit of like stereotypical, like oldest son, middle son, youngest son personalities. So hoping that that kind of shines through in there. And in my mind, like, the middle child kind of stereotype um, is this child who's kind of like the troublemaker or the one that, is more rebellious or the one who's like, a little, not necessarily a black sheep, but definitely the one who's, getting in more trouble compared to the others. So um, I'm going to read one of Shim's poems because I think he's like the best example of kind of this like toxic male figure because that's kind of how I pinned him as the middle brother. So this is a Shim poem, and they're dated. So the poems are just like Shim and then like a date on the ship. And this one I will read is Shim. Sorry, too many good ones. Shim Day 38. The list of what I miss isn't very long. It starts and ends with the hollow space behind the bark of the long dead pistachio tree, the one I hid inside after shoving my younger brother to the ground. His cries cut through the house like the cracking of a switch across my back. Oh, how I miss that second skin.
I was really, really taken by the ways that you managed to create sort of verse vessels for each of the speakers here. Um, Ham always has the prose poems. Noah begins with sonnets and then moves toward a kind of 10 to 14 liner and couplets. Um, Japheth has some couplets. It's a really sort of a genius way of sort of cueing the reader to these voices. And then, of course, they have their own voices as well. I'll just sort of back up and sort of explain these formal strategies a little bit more. Um, and maybe you could talk more about the formal strategies in the book beyond the use of persona. But as you said, the book is divided into four sections with Noah poems ending each of the first three sections. Noah and his sons each get their own verse vessel, as I said. And across Floodchaser, you experiment with prose poems, sonnets, found forms like the online chat, duplexes, the Jericho Brown form, sonnets, as I mentioned, and poems using slash marks, redactions, etc. I'd love to hear your thoughts about shaping the poems for your and the poem's purposes, and certainly for the book's purposes. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you really had two manuscripts here going on, and you managed very successfully, I think, to join them together. So maybe you could talk about that and maybe choose a poem that's representative of that process.
Totally, yeah. I'll start with the Noah stuff just because I feel like I put some thought into it, so I'll just share that with people. But so the first Noah section is a crown of sonnets from Noah, and there's not the iambic pentameter in there, but it still has the 12 syllables and the line or in the stanza breaks where they should be, all up until the very last one when there is a break in the very first line. So in my mind, that is like a moment of doubt kind of creeping in. And then what I kind of call his other poems in the other sections are broken sonnets. So, there's one less line in each of the stanzas. So it's just kind of his kind of doubt creeping in. And stepping back a little bit, I gave him a sonnet because I kind of see it as like the most traditional form of what poetry is. So as like the patriarch of the family, I wanted to give him the most traditional poetry form that there is in my mind. What everyone kind of
Mhm.
thinks of what poetry is, and I tried to break away from that as I went down with the children. So I gave Japheth the couplets because I feel like that's again kind of a traditional thing you see in poetry. You see couplets. It's its own thing, just like Japheth has his own personality, but it still has that tradition. Much like an oldest child would do, they would kind of follow in the parents' footsteps and follow them a little more. And we get Shim is breaking from that. It's still all in one line. It still looks like a poem, but there's not stanzas anymore. But it still has the feel of a poem because it's like a line, a little bit of a break, a line as you're going down the page. And then Ham, who ends up being, the outcast from the family, I wanted to give him a form that is kind of like the outcast form in the poetry world in my mind, and that, there's a lot of debate, like, is it a poem? Is it a short story? Things like that come with prose writing. So I figured if he's the one who's kind of like the outcast, then I'll give him the outcast form. And you kind of see that develop and transition a little bit over time, where at the end of the book in the last section it's another crown of sonnets written from Ham's perspective, but at this time it's sonnets only in the fact that it's 12 lines, but each of those prose poems is 12 lines. So I tried to get him to kind of reclaim a little bit of his own tradition, or get a little bit of his own vision of the world in there, or maybe a callback to his heritage. So um, that was a lot of thought put into that last section as well. But speaking of the
Am I
book,
am
oh,
I
sorry. No,
am I
go for it.
imagining that there was some connection between the author and the character of Ham here in the book?
I mean, if I would love that, then sure, definitely. I think that my own push away from religion and push away from especially Christian religion, I'll just say that just because that's what has like the stronghold in the country, definitely comes through in Ham. I think that realistically, we probably all have a little Japheth and a little Shem in us too. But I tried to find myself identifying with Ham as someone who thinks about others more and cares about their family more and doesn't like just think about some higher being above them, or is someone who at the end is more worried about the lost world, all the things that were lost in the world, than there is appeasing a god. So I think that I definitely feel like I identify a lot more with Ham than any other of the characters, but I would be um, probably kidding myself if I didn't say I have a little bit of the other ones in there too, I'm sure.
Do you want to read some of these poems? I'd love to hear you read them.
Sure, yeah. Should I read more Noah poems or, talk about the other poems as well?
And well, we'll certainly get there, but anything since we're on the subject of Ham and the brothers and
Totally.
that kind of.
I would love to read two of the Noah poems. So again, in the Noah section, there's three sections in the book. The first section is before the boat, the second section is on the boat, and the third section is after the boat. And then the middle section on the boat, all the poems are numbered that represent how long they've been on the boat. So I'll read two Noah poems, like one towards the beginning and then one towards the end of it, so that you could kind of see the progression, or hopefully you can see the progression, because you think about being locked on this boat with the responsibility of um, taking care of yourself and taking care of two of every animal in the world, and just reflecting on, in the Bible, it never says that God speaks to Noah for that whole year that they're on the boat. So it's like you're like thinking to yourself, like, did I do something wrong? Just all the thoughts that could come across to you in that time. So read one from the beginning and the end, and hopefully you can kind of see some of the the stress that comes on by the end. So this one is Noah, day 21. At night, I hear nothing but the screaming peacock 2 floors below me as he fails to feather attention from the peahen. At night, when my wife is asleep, I creep down the stairs and watch the iridescent spots shimmering through the darkened hole, and pretend that I'm staring at the night sky, each feather silently vibrating until it forms its own small galaxy. At night, I dream of becoming a star. This is Noah, day 207. Someone was always going to cut down the cypress, peel the bark, mill their naked bodies into jokes of their former selves. Someone was always going to suspend the hammer's head above the docile nail, each one accepting their place in this world. How many neighbors did you call upon until I let your light tear at the seams? Now I struggle to tell the difference in praying to you and cursing your name.
Really, really powerful. So many poets have written about or talked about the sequential poem or poem sequences in books, the project poem, the project book. Um, we can't talk, I think, about Floodchaser without thinking about that. Would you be willing to say how you came to the sequence and what challenges you faced writing them, and maybe even like what surprised you as you were working through them? I mean, this can be a very I haven't worked in sequences very much myself, but I do know that it can sort of wear on one's energies, right? And can become formulaic at some point. But I never felt that once in reading your sequences. I'm wondering if you could sort of talk about what kept things fresh and what pitfalls you faced as you went through the writing of these poems.
Totally. I think that again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, like my mind really kind of thinks in these narratives, and I really connected early on with this idea of, like, even thinking about writing a book, not even this book, like in general, like just thinking about writing a poetry collection. I was like already thinking like, oh, if I wrote about this topic, I could do these things and kind of go in these worlds. Um and I was also really interested in kind of epistolary poems in general, so kind of poems, letter poems, or in general. And I mentioned it earlier, but Eating in the Underworld by Rachel Zucker was a big influence, and just kind of seeing how you could live within one world for a really long time. outside of that, though, I owe a lot to one of my MFA classes by a poet, Roger Jones. It was a whole class on sequence poetry. And, we read some, classics like, fuck, what did we read? We read Olio, we read some A.R. Ammons, we read some Charles Wright, we read Ilya Kaminsky. So just like, some of these really great, amazing poets who have written books that, are these kind of sequence style books that, I just felt like I connected to books in that class more than books that I've, read before. And, again, it's just because that's just my brain really connects to that kind of narrative style really well. And when I was writing this again, I had a hard time connecting the dots. I saw Noah in its own world. I saw it's like this is a book. This is the book. And at one point, for my MFA thesis, I had like some poems, and then I had like all of the Noah sections, and then some poems at the end. And it didn't really make sense to me at that time. I was like, these don't match up together. Like this thing's too long to go in like a book. So I feel like it really took a lot of reflecting, and it really took a lot of trying to understand what the Noah poems were saying and how I could connect the dots to other poems. And to do that, I thought about, not directly like, what is a flood story? What is everyone dying? But, this other idea of leaving and what comes in the aftermath of leaving. And that's what kind of comes through in the contemporary poem sections is, like, what does it mean to kind of grow up in a place, leave a place, and then once you're gone, think about what you missed out on from that place, even if it was the right reason. You loved leaving, you love the new place you are, the new places you're visiting are great, but what does it still mean to have that place, have that connection to that place, and still be missing it in a way that you wouldn't if you hadn't left it. So I think a lot of that really felt like it connected to the Noah poems in a sense, in like the very like macro looking at Noah. It's like here's people who left a place and then got back to that place, and it totally changed from how they left it. So I tried thinking of that and thinking of what loss meant, and thinking of someone reflecting on the things that they would lose out on, the people they would not get to know, the people who would pass away, and they wouldn't be there anymore, and they would those relationships wouldn't be nurtured just because they left to find something that felt right for them. So yeah, once I kind of saw that through line, or that kind of large macro view, then I was kind of slowly able to like piece the poems together.
Yeah, amazing. I would love to hear some of the poems from the I don't know what to call it, the non-flood section. The other sort of leave taking that happens in the book. If you want to choose one or two things to read from there. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the elegies in the book and the way that they sort of echo the mass destruction that's happening to the earth in the Genesis sections of the book, and certainly the brother connection, the elegy for the brother and the brother's loss, and then the brothers, of course, the sons of Noah brothers that they get to speak in Floodchaser. I don't know where you want to sort of choose something to read, but please do. It would be great to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll read the poem you kind of referenced there, which is kind of like the memorial to a brother. So this is the last poem in the second section. So in my mind, this is kind of like the reason to come home. So like the first section is like growing up in a setting, and the second section is being gone from this place and like exploring the rest of the world and being out there. And then this final poem in this section is kind of like this is what brings you back. Like something tragic happens to bring you back to a place, because that's so natural to what happens to all of us who, leave the place we call home. Something bad happens, and that's why we come back. And then the third section is kind of the reflections that happen when back in that place. So This poem is called In the Wind, the Shape of Ending. The crane looked tired as it stretched its gnawing neck toward a cloud-spangled sky, sun making a fault line of its shadow on the roadway. This was my first time in a limousine, so I too wanted to stretch my body out the sunroof, drag my shadow behind the car like a broken bumper, but the mood didn't call for celebration. Blacked out windows hid our faces from the guardrail of strangers lining the unfamiliar road just outside Leavenworth, each one with a hand to their forehead, as if blocking the sun, as if onion-eyed, as if they knew my brother's name. The American flag, shoved in the mouth of the crane, coughed in the wind.
It's definitely one of my favorites from the book, Erin. Thank you for reading that. Um, I was struck in this poem and in many of the other poems, both the more personal poems and the Noah poems, by the book's range of diction, its formal experiments, and of course its narrative structures. But I was especially delighted by its musicality, and I think we can hear that here, even though you've got very long lines in this poem. So many of the poems shared elements with song, and when I reached the notes section at the end of the book, I saw that there were lines borrowed from or influenced by contemporary bands. I'd love to hear you talk about your relationship to music, when it feels appropriate to incorporate it into your poems, and whether or not you yourself are a musician and how that's connected to poetry in your mind and in your work.
Totally, yeah. I think that, for me, I don't think I would have a connection to poetry without music. And that came from one, just like a lifetime love of listening to music. I was always the person who would buy a CD growing up and then open up and read the liner notes as I was listening to the music so I could learn all the words. And I think just like that connection to language just really meant a lot to, my development of the love of what came into be poetry. Outside of that, when I was in high school and college and then post college, I was in some bands and I was the lead singer of those bands. So I was the one writing the lyrics, and that really was my first taste of writing poetry. It came actually out of my freshman comp class. I'm pretty sure it was my professor at the time. He asked us to just like submit random writing for like extra credit or something. So I submitted some of my old like band lyrics, and he was like, "Oh, maybe you should check out poetry. Maybe you might like poetry." So he like gave me some recommendations, and I read it, and I was like, "Wow, this is really cool." And then, I wasn't my undergrad major was psychology, so I didn't really focus my attention to it, but I kept finding myself coming back to it, taking some creative writing classes every now and again, and poetry, while it wasn't like a huge thing in my life until probably later, it never fully went away. I was always interested in it. I was always reading it. After that point, I was always thinking about, the written word in a different way. So um, I think it's a really important part of my writing. Um, and I think that, for a lot of the country, the closest thing that people have to poetry is music. Poetry is like, if you're in the world, it feels gigantic. But if you're outside of it, like people don't really know what poetry is. And I think the closest thing we have is music. And that's why people, gravitate towards songwriters and like, oh, this is the most amazing writing I've ever heard. And, if you're in the writing world, you're like, it's not that great, but I appreciate that you love it, that kind of thing. Not to call it any names, but yeah,
Yes,
I
yes.
think that, the fact that people have a connection to writing or, poetry is through music. And I totally relate to that. And I don't fault them for having that connection. Um, and for me, again, if someone likes Fall Out Boy, for example, and then they read my poem and they see a Fall Out Boy lyric in there and that makes them like poetry, then that would be really cool. I would love to have that happen. I would love bridging that gap. For me, you know, uh, where I grew up, not a lot of people read poetry, just kind of like this working class setting. So if the closest thing you have is music, then I want to try to incorporate that into my writing as like a welcome for any of those people who want to, maybe try out something new.
Absolutely. I mean, it invited you into poetry. Why wouldn't it,
Exactly.
work on others, right? Exactly. Do you want to try to read maybe one of your more song-like poems, something that you sort of dream might be set to music someday, or that you can as a song lyric, a successful song lyric as well as a successful poem?
Oh man.
Anything will
I
do. I think all the poems are
yeah. No,
quite
I was gonna say I genuinely
long.
like. I fear that anyone would have to hear me trying to sing any of these in as like songs, but I'll definitely read one as a poem, and I'll read one that borrowed from a lyric of a song. So uh, this one borrowed from a very classic song that most people know, "Sweet Home Alabama" by Leonard Skinner. The poem is called "I Miss Home Again, and I Think It's a Sin." Manchester feels so ancient to me as I stumble over snaggletooth streets, each red brick forged in a fire older than any place I've called home. But today I saw a church with no roof, I-beam straight down the center, no shingles to shelter as moss prays across pews that only know rot. It felt strangely US American to me, like a white Jesus blasting Skinnerd, doing donuts in his T-top IROC Z, collecting sacraments of rust. Back home, our buildings crumble to skeletons younger than me, in asphalt parking lots that crack open like a book of Psalms. Tear down, pave, rebuild, repeat. A downfall no angel watches over.
Thank you. Absolutely beautiful. I think we probably want to open things up to audience questions here in a little while. If you wanted to put a question in the chat, I'm sure Aaron would be happy to answer those questions. I know one of them that will come over the chat will be this question, Aaron. So I'll ask it before anyone else does. And that is, this is your first book. This is a huge accomplishment. It's rare to, have a win like this. Congratulations again. Do you have any advice for poets who are trying to, break that barrier, right? What advice can you offer to poets who are making a debut collection and sending their manuscripts out?
I would say, the reality is in our poetry world, each of these contests is, 30, 20, 30, $40. And it can be hard to apply to things. Like it really can. Um, Especially if you're trying to like just send it out so many contests. You have to have a lot of money to be able to do that. So I really recommend really finding the contests that either are at publishers who you really admire, publishers whose work they publish sounds like yours, or publishers who have contests with poets you really admire. That's what really drew me to the Catamaran contest. I was like, Mary Szybist, she's amazing. I was just hoping that I could get a chance that she would read my book. Like, I never thought that I would win the contest. I was like, if there's some chance that Mary reads my book, then I'm just going to enter this contest. It's worth that.
Sure.
Um, Outside of that, though, I really recommend spending time. I know it's hard. You get a completed thing. You have your, 100 pages of poetry or 75, whatever it is, and you're like, I'm done. Let's start sending it out. And I had that same mentality. Like when I got out of my MFA program, I was so just like psyched up to have like a completed thing. I took my MFA thesis and I sent it out to maybe like half a dozen contests, and they were all rejections, and for the better. Like that form that it was in at that time was not what it needed to be in to be a book. And after that, I really took 2 to 3 years, really thinking about how I could take this completed set of poems and craft it into a manuscript. And I just really recommend taking that time to think about, what stories are being told in certain sections, like how can one section connect to another, how can the beginning say something to the end, or the end kind of reveal something new about the beginning, just these small things that I think really, to me, came from reading like novels and things like that too, just like thinking about a structure of some sort. So yeah, we all get this excitement and when we finish a manuscript, but definitely taking an extra minute to sit down and be like, what could I do to make this better, I think is a helpful thing to think about.
Absolutely, and it's so instructional actually to get rejections.
Yeah.
And it gives you it feels bad, but it gives you the opportunity to sort of rethink what it is you've been doing. You mentioned your MFA program and writing some of these poems for your MFA thesis. I wonder if you would, I have no idea whether or not the poem One Year in Texas is related to your time in the MFA program there, but I wonder if you'd read that for us because I really, really love the poem. And when I thought about the spiritual journey of the speaker of the poems, the speaker that's not Noah or any of his sons, um, I felt that it really sort of, that began to sort of blossom for me at this moment of the book. Do you mind reading that?
Not at all. Yeah, this poem was written while I was in Texas. It was inspired by a place called Enchanted Rock in Texas, which is like literally just this like giant rock. There's lots of beautiful hiking around there, but when I was doing hiking around Enchanted Rock, I found a really pretty flower, and the name of it was Texas skeleton. And then that really made me think about, how could I use that kind of double entendre in a poem where I'm talking about a flower, but if someone doesn't know that's a flower's name, it's telling like a whole different story. So this poem is called One Year in Texas, and I always stumble in this one, so just bear with me. I'll try my best. My Texas skeleton, sunburned and blistered beige. My Texas skeleton slouched towards the Bethel bird bath, long dried up. My Texas skeleton swam in cumulus shadows. My Texas skeleton wove a sweater out of the fog and wore it like an evening offering. My Texas skeleton forgot all about its summer skin, so the wind whispered last rites to my Texas skeleton, and it hibernated in the crown of an unrelenting snowstorm. My Texas skeleton groveled at frostbitten feet until my Texas skeleton was lifted up by the rising sun. It bathed in the rain, and the rain, and the rain called cankerworms to inch my collarbone until my Texas skeleton bloomed in waves of violet.
Thank you so much, and no stumbling at
Yeah,
all.
that was great.
Thank you. I don't see any questions yet from the audience. Um, yeah, the repetition throughout the book is really, really strong, and some of the forms, Aaron, that you use, some of the formal structures that you use, really highlight your gift for repetition. Certainly, the duplex, the Jericho Brown form, in which entire lines to be repeated. It's such a difficult form. I really applaud the way that you used it in the book. Just maybe one or two things while we're waiting for questions that I wanted to touch on that we didn't get a chance to talk about. One, of course, is just, I mean, this is the Noah story, right? One is water and the
Hmm.
importance of water in the poem. There's a Charles Wright epigraph that opens the book. The book, of course, is called Floodchaser. Um, I wonder if you talk about, especially as someone who's lived virtually all over the country, about the importance to both the environment and your sort of personal environment um, to water.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I mean, a lot of these poems were written when I was in Texas in my MFA program in San Marcos, Texas, and one of the biggest lifebloods of San Marcos is the San Marcos River, and it is the escape for Texas summers when there's, weeks or months of 100-degree weather, that spring-fed, super clear river is where everyone congregates, where, everyone is sitting in it, trying to cool down during these hot times. So, you know, riding in a place where part of the state is just so dry for such a big chunk of the year, and then having this respite of water just really made me kind of reflect on its importance. I mean, it's clearly, I'm lucky enough right now to even work in a sector that's like helping people get drinking water, so I understand the importance of what water is and how this resource is slowly dwindling away, and how there's an important fight to try to get people clean water for drinking, living, showering, anything you need as a human necessity. And but outside of it being this important life saving thing, it also is like, and as you see in my poems, this thing that can wash things away, whether it's the Noah poem, like literally like washing people away, or Elegy written in a suburban cemetery too. You see parts of the poem that are erased from, water washing away uh, gravestones. So there's these elements of what water can be, this lifeblood, but also this thing that kind of erases past in a way that the contradiction between the two worlds is really interesting to me. And I find that in the various worlds of what water is, I think it's important for all of us to understand all of it.
Of course, and I think that you sort of strike that balance so well in this book, the destructive force and also the life-giving force of water itself. You handle it really beautifully. We have questions. Amanda says, "I'm wondering what you're working on now, and what poems are guiding your next project."
That's a great question. So I'm finding out that promoting a book takes a lot of work. So personally, I'm not doing a lot of writing right now, just because I feel like a lot of my free time energy is going to like events like this and trying to promote events like this and things like that. So I feel like I haven't written in a while, but I think the next project, or at least the poems that are coming out of me right now, are feeling different than what's in this book. They're feeling a little more experimental. I feel like these poems are a lot more narrative and a lot more clear, and the new ones are a lot more emotional, and like kind of the tone is what really is driving them. So I'm not really sure where that's headed yet. I think more of them need to come out before I can see it, but it definitely is going to feel, at least at the moment, like all the poems are definitely almost like the opposite of this. So maybe I needed that.
Mm.
Like maybe I like, got my narrative sense out, and now I'm like, how can I write just towards emotion? Um, Outside of that, though, like I don't feel tied down to poetry. I love poetry, but I have novels and screenplays and everything else in me as well. So I'm kind of living in the world of Floodchaser now, and living in this high of getting a book published and all the exciting events of it. And then I want to see what comes next. Maybe it is those kind of more experimental poems. Maybe it is a novel or short story. I'm not sure yet. So I want all of the things to live in me, growing in my brain as I kind of plan for what comes next.
That's absolutely thrilling. I can't wait to see what you do next. But as you said earlier, take your time and enjoy this.
Yeah.
Celebrate this while it lasts. Diana has a question. When do you write? Do you write spontaneously when you see or experience something, or do you have a routine, like a certain time of day? What does that look like for you?
Now, and for the most part, I would say it's spontaneous. Like if you look at the notes app on my phone, it's mostly just like lines that come to me, whether it's, something that comes into my head, or, something that I'm listening to or reading in a book or on a podcast, just like something that sparks something in my head. Like the lines in my notes app on my phone is probably like a Moby Dick length of all of these lines that just need to be crafted into something. And um, I think that it probably needs to turn into a more formal routine for the next thing. You know, most of these poems in Floodchaser were written when I was at my MFA program, where I had this dedicated time to writing and, you know, all of my focus. So I think I'm still working on what it means to be a writer outside of that. It's different editing a book. You know, the 2 or 3 years post graduation for my MFA program was mostly focused on editing, and, you know, granted there is some writing in the editing process, but it's not the same as like ground up writing. So
Right.
I do think that I need to work it into my life in a better way. But again, I also enjoy my process, which is doing a lot of writing in my head. I feel like I think about things for a really long time, and then I'll sit down at a computer, and then I'll have like this really like thing like almost not done but like nearly done, just because like I've been going over lines or connecting things in my head for such a long time that by the time I'm ready to like write it out by hand or type it out, that it's gone through several edits already.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, we have time for more questions, but I was wondering if you might think, Aaron, about sort of playing us off with
Yeah,
a poem or two from the book.
I would love to read a couple poems from the last section. Maybe this is like the second to last section. So the very last section is a longer sequence poem in itself that is 7 poems long, and I don't want to read from that section because I want that to be something that you all read and can find connection to. But from the third section, the second to last section, we kind of see this shift of focus from water to light, because I kind of see the like antithesis to water, or like a storm is the light. So two of the poem, or yeah, two of the poems I'll read really quickly here. I'll start with one called "The Night Stops at Our Bodies," and this is a poem inspired by Jericho Brown's duplex form. The night stops at our bodies. When I was younger, I wanted to glow, but when I was younger, I wanted to glow, but clouds chase the moon across the sky. Between the push and pull of the moon, small gods map out their own constellations. Even though small gods deserve constellations, I no longer wish to look at dead things. Everywhere I look, there are dead things. This neighborhood still barfs repetition. In a never-ending neighborhood, I was a mistake no flood could consume. Every mistake the flood consumed shadowed the false rays of the moon. In the shadows and false rays of the moon, I learned what it really takes to glow. And that poem is followed up by the poem "In Hope of Never Writing an Elegy to Light." In hope of never writing an elegy to light, because a stadium of lighters is not the same thing. Neither is a midnight loading dock with workers on a smoke break, nor the stilt of skyscraper with janitors going from room to room. It's not the blackout of subway lit by phones, not the lightning that killed all of the power, not the wing beat of firework flash, nor the etching left by their falling embers. Not camera burst, starburst, sunburst, outburst of spark singing from the end of a grinding wheel. Not the perforation of planet in night sky, not the dizziness of shore lined with lighthouses. It's not the tiny bulbs guiding you towards the exit row, neither is it the procession of cars with hazards quivering, nor the slow sizzle of flares outlining the crash. That is why I want to write a poem about fireflies before they go extinct.
Thank you so much, Aaron. We have another question from Amethyst, talking about wanting to get into poetry. What advice would you give to baby poets?
Read a lot of poetry and do a lot of writing and take community classes. Like I don't know where everyone is located, but there's so many online classes these days where you can um, take classes with amazing poets, and they can guide you through, just writing lines or connecting to writing or anything else. So local community things are great too. I know in Portland here we have several different places that host community style workshops. And if you don't have something in your community, something online is definitely the way to go. But I really feel like you got to read it and you got to just practice writing. I think like the reading it really helps you think about the line in different ways or think about um, poetry in different ways than if you're just like trying to jump right into it. So, also, I recommend, we live in a world where reading is harder than plenty of great audiobooks of poetry out there or podcasts where people are reading poetry. Finding ways to just interact with the written word in a way that can make you think about it differently is super helpful.
I think that's great advice, Aaron. And we do have another sort of pop-up question about COVID lockdown and whether or not it factored into the Noah narrative as metaphor, or if Allie, I believe, read into it because we lived through it. Interesting question.
100% that's in there, like 200, 300, 400%. I can't remember. So I was another one of my MFA classes taught by Deborah Monroe, who's an amazing, amazing writer, amazing mentor. She gave us a writing prompt, and I wish I could remember what it was, but it made me write the very first Noah poem. And the idea behind it, from what I can remember, is like writing from this idea of isolation. I was in the program during lockdown, COVID lockdown. The first year and a half of my MFA program was pretty much online just because, it wasn't safe to be in person yet. And so when we had this writing prompt and we are thinking about isolation, and I was thinking about reflecting about COVID, I was like, what is the most like isolated kind of scenario, or like, COVID to like the millionth power? And that Noah's story came to mind for me then, because you have these people who are locked in this place, and it really can drive out the stir craziness as we saw in each other. And and outside of that, a lot of the reflection on the people we lost during COVID is what I hope to come out, and what kind of struggles with the Noah characters, because we were just locked in our homes, and loved ones and friends and not people we don't know, but so many people died, and it was just hard to like understand what was happening outside of our little bubble, because we couldn't just escape it, or take the time to mourn with our friends, or be there with our loved ones when they passed away. And a lot of that thought went into writing, especially in that middle section of Noah poems, of like just what it would be like being on this ship, thinking about the loss of an entire world of people and animals and everything. What what does that mean? Like, some people would come out of it just like not changing or not thinking anything of it. Other people would be completely haunted by it. So um, I was hoping that would, some of those connections ring through, just because the isolation of COVID and the loss that happened around it were a big influence in what was happening in those Noah sections specifically.
So interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I see Catherine lurking there at the bottom. Does that mean we're out of time?
Let's see. Hmm. Hello. Yes, I think we have finished. But the chat is still active here, so if anyone wants to leave our poets any last comments, you can continue to comment. Um, Yeah, Floodchaser. This is Floodchaser, everyone. And this was such a wonderful conversation. We learned so much behind the scenes, the backstory, the writing process, the artistic thoughts. And I think it will give our readers so much more information when they go to get this book. If you don't already have it, you can order right here on Order the Book. And we'll be getting more books this next week to send you all. So this is just such an incredible collection, and we're really thrilled to be able to publish it. This is the eighth annual Poetry Prize for West Coast Poets. The ninth annual one is open now for submissions. If you do have a manuscript, you can submit on the Catamaran website, catamaranliteraryreader.com. This year's judge is Joe Millar, and so you can send us your full manuscript. We also are a literary magazine, Catamaran, and we just published our 50th issue of the magazine, and we're working on our 51st issue. So we would love it if you have a single poem or a group of 5 poems to send us, and we publish the poem on its own page paired with fine art, so you get a 2-page spread. So if you're a poet and you don't have a manuscript, you can send us your single poems as a way to get your work published with Catamaran. And I just want to thank Kathy and Aaron again for this lovely discussion. And I learned so much about the book myself. So thank you both for being with us, and thank you all 48 people who came. It was wonderful to share Floodchaser with you. And Aaron Tyler Hand is got his first book out, but many more to come, I'm sure. So thank you all, and be sure to get
Congratulations again, Aaron.
Thank you, Kathy, for sitting with me. Thank you, Catherine, for setting this all up, and Catamaran for publishing this book. Yeah, and if anybody wants to host a reading for me or let me be part of a reading, let me know. I want to keep promoting this book as all I can. I got a reading in Portland this Saturday, and then I have another reading in Denver next month. So I would love to keep traveling and reading and telling people about my book.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you all.
Congratulations.
Thanks. So we all wait for the end button.